Back in 2019, I released a video called How to Win the One Planet Challenge, and this had to do with the fact that the 2.2 Laguin patch had some very weird interactions with the purging system, specifically the forced labor system, where you could very slowly generate almost infinite amount of resources by using this particular purge option. And that by itself got nerfed to the ground pretty darn quickly, because it turns out that they weren't getting purged fast enough, which meant that you could get, as I said, an infinite amount of resources. However, since then, I have been looking for the perfect opportunity to bring the One Planet Challenge back, and in this particular case, without any janky interactions between the game systems. And as of the 3.1 Lem patch and the changes that came with humanoids and plantoids, I think I have found the perfect One Planet Challenge build. It's time, my friends. Let's dive into the tallest of the tall, the single planet that will end all. Let's dive right into the One Planet Challenge. We're gonna have a fun time today. Now, before we continue, we need to define what the One Planet Challenge actually is. This is the idea. You start on a planet, you don't colonize anything else. That is it. You can take territory, you can turn other empires into your subjects, whether or not it be tributaries or vassals, and that's effectively it. You cannot swap planets. You have to make do with what you have and try to win the game. That is a One Planet Challenge. Originally, the One Planet Challenge was played in the following way. You had an egalitarian, xenophobe, pacifist empire with inwards perfection for maximum food output, as well as life-seeded for a maximum size planet. Since life-seeded has moved over towards a origin, as well as inward perfection not working very well with this build, this is no longer going to be viable for our purposes. Instead, we're going to be taking a look at how to pull this one off. In order to use this build, we're going to need the following expansions. We need humanoids and plantoids, the species packs that recently got updated, Utopia, Apocalypse, and Megacorp as our main expansions, because they all add features that are going to be required in order to pull this one off, and it's a nice bonus to have distant stars to get some events along the way that are going to boost our output in space, because we're going to be focusing quite a lot on our space output. This is mainly to do with the sprawl mechanic, and we don't want to get too large, but we only want to focus on singular systems with high output, and distant stars is going to help there quite a lot. In terms of empire setup, the tallest boys, as I will call them for this particular playthrough, are fascinating because they are min-maxing certain mechanics in order to get ahead of the pack while still living only on a singular planet. And considering we cannot run the origin of Gaia world in this one because we want a very specific origin to make this empire work, we're going to need to start on a normal world. In this particular case, we're going to go with an ocean world, which by itself is very nice. It has a very high amount of food output, and you could potentially change this over to something else for energy and minerals, but in all honesty, it doesn't really matter because the layout of our districts in general for this doesn't matter at all. The type of planet you can take is perfectly fine to have any of it. The real magic happens, however, when we look at our civics, as well as, of course, our origin. So if we actually take a look here at our civics, we have, of course, catalytic processing, which came with the plantoids update in 3.1, which basically replaces all our metallurgists with catalytic technicians that will turn food into alloys instead of minerals. We do this because we want to be completely mineral independent. We want to clear up those districts so we can actually produce consumer goods as well as alloys. If we have too many districts in the food department, or the mineral department actually, then that's not going to be possible. We want to be completely independent of that, and it's really important that we do. Then there is Masterful Crafters for the engineering bonuses that we can get in the technology side, but also consumer goods, because yes, we will be running Utopian Abundance on this particular build, mainly for the Unity and the research bonuses that we can get out of that due to unemployment of our main species. And I'm saying that with a lot of focus because unemployment is incredibly powerful with Utopian Abundance. In addition to that, we are going to be running into problems when it comes to Unity generation, which may stifle our building up of our traditions somewhat. In addition to that, it doesn't really matter whether or not we're going to go oligarchic or democratic. Democratic is not that good in this particular case because automatic resettlement chance is not going to be useful at all, considering we're on a singular planet. And oligarchy, of course, getting a little bit of additional faction influence is nice because influence is actually kind of good for this particular build. Then we have militarist. This is not necessary for this particular build, but it is a nice bonus due to the synergies with the origin, which we'll talk about shortly. Xenophobe is a must-have for this build, and I will go a little bit deeper into that shortly. And egalitarian, of course, for the utopian living standards bonus, because once again, we want to get science bonuses as well as unity bonuses from unemployment. Then we get to our origin, which is, of course, going to be a one and only clone army. Now, clone army is incredibly powerful. It is objectively one of the most powerful builds within the game, and you can get an insane amount of resources from this if you, of course, go for the clone ascended choice down the line. It's actually very important that you go down that route rather than the fertile clones because of the insane bonuses that we can get to both firepower but also specialist resource output, and we really want to focus on that. In addition, the initial bonus to fire rate as well as ship upkeep can make our fleets incredibly powerful in the early game, which is exactly what we need. All the other stuff, things like traits, we're going to be focusing on intelligence for the science, unruly and sedentary, because sedentary is it's basically cheap in this particular case. Unruly doesn't really apply to us because we're not actually going to have that many pops of our own type. And traditional from the unity bonuses as well. And natural engineers because it synergizes quite nicely with our civics. So let's dive right into the tallest boys and see how this all plays out. We're going to have a lot of fun here. As we start off our game, there's a couple of things we need to do straight away. First, of course, we need to take a look at our surrounding area, and as we can see in this particular case, we have a black hole nearby, which we will need to colonize or at least capture relatively early on, but that may change based on what game you are playing, of course. The real thing here is that we need to go into our policy and need to go into our diplomatic stance. We need to go into the isolationist department. Why? Because we will get additional admin cap as well as unity. Diplomatic weight as well as influence is not really necessary at this point in time. We can swap that over in like 10 years from now, which is kind of nice. But being isolationist is really going to help us straight away with our unity builds. And that is kind of important because we want to get steam rolling as soon as possible. So the very first districts we're going to be running here on Ivory Tower are agricultural districts. And this may seem a little bit counterproductive to our general setup because it is in the end food, but wouldn't we want minerals? No, because we are running catalytic processing, which means that all of our minerals are going to be coming from space, because our minerals are not going to be used for the creation of alloys. No, we're going to use food for that instead. The minerals are going to go to consumer goods as well, which are kind of useful, but we're going to get most of those once again from space. So right now we're going to be bouncing back and forth between agricultural districts as well as industrial districts and a city district here and there to unlock a couple of additional building slots to get more science buildings up and running. Science is really important in this game, in case you hadn't noticed, because those who are ahead in the science game will most likely win. It doesn't really matter whether or not they have a single planet or not. We also want to keep our stability as high as possible. Crime is going to be a problem sooner or later, but I'm not too concerned about that. But still, we want to start queuing up our resources here. And considering we have a reasonable amount of energy, food, and consumer goods, which we're not going to spend on anything important like colony ships, as I already mentioned, we can sell all those off and just get more minerals to get more buildings and city districts, as well as other districts, of course. You may want to keep a little bit of those consumer goods in order to boost your output in terms of amenities and all that jazz, just to get higher stability and happiness, to get higher output on our specialists. But all in all, this is a really good direction to go into early on. We don't need minerals. We don't need minerals at all. We actually don't need food all that much, but we'll talk about that a little bit later down the line. Sooner rather than later, you're going to be running into your first tradition pick. And I've already picked the first one for this particular one, which is, of course, Prosperity. Prosperity is incredibly good for this particular build, as well as Clone Soldiers in general. The adoption effects of having mining station output plus 20% can be extremely powerful, especially considering most of our minerals are going to come from space. But in addition, the standard construction templates are incredibly good due to their reduction in build speed into costs of buildings and districts and increased build speed. Because as you can see, our population is already starting to boom with workers being basically generated very, very quickly. And at this stage, we want to take a look at city districts and actually build up another science depot. If you can at this stage, getting an architectural engineer leader is also incredibly good due to the additional bonuses it will give to lower the cost of your buildings and districts, which is something that you really want to keep in mind. If you can get an architectural engineer as a governor for the clone soldiers, please get it, because they are probably some of the best leaders that you can get in the early game for this particular build. So our little empire is growing nicely. We have a fleet of science ship basically trying to figure out what is going on, and it's mainly due to distant stars. But also we are picking up systems that are going to be useful to us down the line. Systems with strategic resources and large amounts of science are always good, but large amounts of materials are good as well. Right now, we're not picking up any systems with small amounts of resources because that is going to have knock-on effects on our empire sprawl, which is then going to cause issues with our administrative capacity and overextension, and we want to avoid that at all cost. Now, as we go to Ivory Tower, we see that we have a large amount of unemployment going on, mainly due to us not having enough space for any more districts. And that is fine. We can work with that. It's not really an issue. However, as you can see, we now have an additional cloning vat, so we can churn out more pops. That will bring our max pops for our clones up to 60, as well as a robot assembly plant, because we're going to need robots to take care of our food stuff so that most of our other pops can work in the industrial districts to generate consumer goods as well as alloys. So that's a really nice thing to have. However, we're still going to need to deal with this unemployment. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to go to our species and take a look at the joys that is our empire and basically the rights that we have here. The living standards should be set to utopian abundance because unemployment pops will have unity as well as science output at a cost of higher consumer goods. And thankfully we have an offset here, so it's not going to be too much of a problem because we can always buy the resources required. But as you can see, the unemployment will now give us a reasonable amount of additional science as well as unity, which we can then of course transition towards our tradition trees and additional science, because as I said before, science is king, and we want to keep as much of that as possible. So, as you can see, as soon as the month ticks over, I'm just going to go to fastest quickly to make sure that we have a good idea of what's going on there. All of a sudden, we have minus 22 consumer goods. But we can deal with that by just buying those consumer goods on the market at a reasonable cost, so 22 for now, and basically say, okay, well, we can deal with that for now. So we're going to be buying those materials. Our consumer goods are going to be in a good spot, and our energy -6 is something that we can deal with quite easily. But as long as our consumer goods are balanced, as well as our other resources are balanced, we should be okay. We also have a large pool of minerals, as well as a reasonable amount of alloys. But overall, this is just a setup. We are looking for something very specific in order to make this empire work. One of the key components of the One Planet Challenge is the fact that planets can only support so much pop growth. And sure, you can work with migration treaties and stuff like that in order to make everything work. However, there are better things dealing with this. And sure, the clones can get over 100 pops. And if we take a look at our homeworld, you can see we, of course, have those 3 cloning vats up and running to get 60 pops in total. We have some problems with amenities as well as unemployment, but of course, we've already offset that. But there's better ways of getting pops. And that has to do with this here primitive primitive world that we've just found and that we are currently bombarding with our fleet. The pops are really, really strong, the leaders for the clones, and of course this primitive world, having 11 pops at the moment, are not going to be too happy with us bombarding them. But that's fine, because we're going to find a brand new home for them very soon, because we are using the raiding bombardment. Yes, we have spent our first ascension point on nihilistic acquisition. Now, normally you would go for something like technological ascendancy because of the research speed bonus that you can get out of it. It's a nice second pick, but for this build we need nihilistic acquisition to make it work. We'll go a little bit more detail about that shortly, but all you need to know at the moment is that raiding is really, really important for our pops, and specifically to make our empire work properly. And that kind of all ties into catalytic processing and all of the joys that comes with that, because they are going to be working our farms in a very peculiar way. Now, we're going to be getting more pops very shortly, because we are, of course, bombarding this planet. And we already have one. A Kilrillian pop has joined us, and that's exactly what we need. Now, they'll have less pops now, but that's fine, because now we can go into our species tab and actually take a look at what kind of pops we have. So right now, they are prisoners with jobs, and they are set to chattel slavery. But right now, that's not something that we need. Chattel slaves are nice and all, but they don't really have what we need. Basically, chattel slavery does the following. Basically, they can work in every single job except for rulers and specialists, and they will give a bonus to resource output and have a reduction in happiness, but that's not really what we need. Instead, they're going to be working our farms as a livestock. They are going to be the livestock, because they're going to be generating food, and I think you can already see where this is going. Because we are running these pops as food, they will be generating food, and that means that we no longer need the agricultural districts in order to keep things rolling. So what we can do at this point, because we have a reasonable amount of food, we can start replacing our agricultural districts with industrial districts, new places for our pops to work, as well as the robots that we'll be having very, very soon. But still, it's a really good way of doing things, because we will no longer need agricultural districts, we will no longer need mineral districts, because we're getting all of our minerals from space, leaving just the generator districts, which sooner or later we are also going to get from space, leaving only the industrial district as well as the city district to keep everything running. And that's exactly what we need. This is pretty much the core of this build, because you need the food in order to keep your economy rolling. Sure, amenities are still an issue, but we can offset that later on with, well, servants. As soon as we find them, of course. Now, the raiding stance being one of the key components of our empire, as well as getting as much livestock as possible, it means that we're going to be going to war pretty much all the time. But that's fine, because all of our pops, specifically our core pops, are perfectly scoped for firepower, which basically means that relatively early on in the game, you'll have several fairly large fleets moving around from planet to planet, ready to capture would-be pops that are ready to be, what's the word I'm looking for here? Harvested for the cause, such as this little fleet over here that is in the process of getting all the pops off of this planet. Now, I've been raiding a little bit already, which kinda translates to this screen right here. We have a large amount of pops of various varieties, and of course our planet currently has 200 pops on it. We do have a lot of crime, it's not a lot we can do about that, we can just try to get it under control, but still it's nice to see that our empire is doing relatively well, aside from the amenities, because we haven't distributed our goods in a little while. Still though, we can do a lot better here, as, well, our amenities need to be improved, so we need a new set of pops being brought in. However, we have transitioned all of our agricultural districts over towards industrial districts, and they will now generate a reasonable amount of alloys every single month. Right now it's 40. It seems like a little bit like a low amount, but still, you know, it translates pretty nicely. Also, I got the Warforged, so there's that as well. If you manage to roll the Cyber-X, you're even better off than a standard game because of the insane amount of alloys you'll be generating. I'm also sitting on a single Ascension perk because I'm waiting for psionics, because that's the direction you could go into. You can also go into the direction of biological engineering, but for fun's sake, psionics is pretty much the way to go, and we'll go over that shortly once we're going to talk about our Ascension perks. But still, this war right now is a war for a tributary, which is pretty decent. You know, getting tributaries, giving you resources all the time is nice. Plus, it gives you a nice excuse to continuously going to other planets to start rampaging through their systems and taking as many pops as you can. And sooner or later, you will be moving over towards other systems to take their pops as well. And another kind soul has joined our empire. Welcome, good sir, and or madam, or gender of that we don't know of, because in the end you are an alien. You will do well on Ivory Tower to join our population of infinite livestock. Now, of course, with all that raiding that you're going to be doing and gathering new people to join your empire under a tributary form or something else, and sooner or later you're going to end up with an empire pool that looks a little bit like this, you're going to need to have domestic servants. And that's basically because domestic servants do the following. Basically, if they are... if they are employed, they will generate amenities. So if they don't have another job, they will hold amenities, which is nice. Basically what that translates to is that if you have a lot of these pops, you will be generating a reasonable amount of amenities, and your stability will go up quite significantly. Now, in terms of Ascension perks, there are a couple things that you can do here, and I already talked about it just now. You can go mind over matter in order to get the psionic sides of things and basically get some of the best ships designs within the game. But in addition to that, you can also get some crazy leader traits and basically also get a bunch of great technology bonuses from that as well. Another option here is, of course, to go down the biological engineering path and max out all of that stuff so that you can turn your prisoners without jobs, or with jobs in some cases, into the perfect servants that you need for your empire. For instance, livestock can be turned into a delicious species with all the joys that comes with that. So that's something to keep in the back of your head if you're playing. You don't need to go psionic. It's nice to have for the fleet bonuses because, let's be honest here, we can get all the cool bonuses from Unity as well as some of our fleet bonuses as well. So, now that we have our empire set up and we are basically churning through everybody else because we are by far the most powerful empire on the map, even though we have a singular planet. The thing that we now need to do is turn our capital world into an ecumenopolis because we're running out of housing, and of course amenities are going to be a problem in the future. Plus, the districts that we can get from the ecumenopolis will boost our production of resources a lot better, which means that we can do even better in the future. Plus, we have 300 pops on our worlds, but don't worry too much about that. So yeah, go for the Ecumenopolis build here. Don't go for adaptability. That was a mess up on my side. But yeah, going for archaeology is incredibly good, especially considering it has a relatively low cost of only 20,000 minerals and 200 influence. So get that up and running so that you can get more districts on your planet that are far more cost effective. Plus, you don't need that agricultural district. You don't need the mines. You don't need to generate districts because you're getting all those resources from either livestock, from catalytic processing, or just from trade value or other trades and stuff like that. We have so much food. We can just trade easily 300 to 400 food onto the market and get almost infinite amount of energy, and that's exactly what we would want to have. So in the end, why is this build so powerful? Well, first of all, we have the ability to get an Ecumenopolis and we do not need food or minerals. And with previous One Planet Challenge builds, we would have to use forced labor for that. Thankfully, due to catalytic processing, we no longer have that issue because food is now being generated by our insane amounts of livestock. We got 500 pops on this planet, and amenities are being produced by our servants, which is nice as well. Plus, the Ecumenopolis itself has a large amount of foundry archaeologies as well as factory archaeologies to make sure that we have enough resources to do what we need to do. And we can always swap things out but where needed. Now, when it comes to the rest of the game, you will want to claim as many megastructures as possible, such as this interstellar assembly we got over here, which will give us additional diplomatic points. In addition, any other ones that are around, claim those, build a gateway in those systems, and you'll be golden. Also, it's probably a good idea to try to get a science nexus up and running for even more science, because you will be struggling to get a lot of it, but thankfully you should be able to control your empire sprawl nicely. In this particular case, I didn't do a particularly good job, but you get the general idea, because you want to pick systems based around their resources and try to get be as efficient as possible with trying to get systems up and running to reduce that empire sprawl. But still, what can you do from this moment onwards? Well, you can try to become Galactic Emperor. It's relatively easy because of the sheer amount of pops that you have, as well as the bonuses to firepower from the clones. You'll be able to get a large fleet, and of course the Ecumenopolis generates one of the largest economical outputs within the game, which will mean that you are the top dog within the galaxy. You can become Emperor and basically tell everybody what to do, and then pray that the final crisis doesn't overrun you. In addition to that, you can do something that I particularly like, and that is going into the crisis route. Now, the crisis route allows you to basically sterilize the entire galaxy and win the game. Because you have a singular planet where everything happens, it means that you can focus all your defenses on that single location and make sure that you are properly defended. Plus, all those pops that you've been harvesting from other places, such as this Federation over here, or these little empires over here, and even some of your tributaries, means that everybody is super weak, and you'll be able to keep them under control. It's all about raiding. Keep the little guy down, or even further down than they already were, and get as many pops as possible to keep the motor of your empire running. We have citizens that are generating resources by the ton. We have 1,600 food being generated on this planet. We have 700 amenities being generated, a rather limited amount of resources coming from unemployment, but every little bit helps. And overall, we are doing exceptionally well for this stage in the game. Try to max out your technology. Do you need a Psi Core? No, you don't need it, but it's still nice for the stability boost, because 73 stability with 500 pops is rather nice. You can get this number even crazier. You can go so much higher with this. I've had this build going up all the way to 1,200 pops on one world, and I didn't run into any problems whatsoever. Sure, crime's gonna be a problem, but do you really care when these are the amount of resources that you have? When these are the trades that you're running? Yeah, I don't think so. The One Planet Challenge is back, and I challenge you to come up with an even better build. Give me some suggestions down below in the comments. I'm looking forward to your suggestions when it comes to this particular setup. Can your One Planet Challenge make it to the end of the game? I'm looking forward to see what you have in mind. The One Planet Challenge is back, and the future is bright. It's time to wrap up this video. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to my patrons as well as the gigantic amount of livestock that has made this build possible. Thank you so much for watching. And until next time, take good care of yourselves, as well as each other.